The period of time on the biblical calendar known as the counting of the Omer is the 50-day period from the day after the regular weekly Sabbath, which falls during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, to the Feast of Weeks, or Shavuot. Yeshua was very active during this time, teaching and preparing his disciples to go out into the world and preach the gospel. I'm Dan Cathcart, and this is Shadows of the Messiah. Omer means sheaf, as in a sheaf of grain. It's defined in the Strong's Dictionary as number 6016, meaning a heap, a sheaf, also an omer, as a dry measure. Now God tells us in his instructions to Moses to count 50 days from the Feast of Firstfruits to the Feast of Weeks. Look at Leviticus 23:15 through 16. And you shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be completed. Count 50 days to the day after the 7th Sabbath. Then you shall offer a new grain offering to the Lord. The Feast of Firstfruits celebrates the ripening barley, the first fruit of the year. The first fruit of the season is offered to God. Yeshua rose from the grave as this day began. Look at John 20, verse 1. Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early. While it was still dark, she saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. He is the firstfruits of the resurrection. From this day, God tells us to count 50 days to the next firstfruits grain offering, the firstfruits of the wheat harvest. So what happened on these 50 days in the year that Yeshua's resurrection? What happened on the 50th day? Is there any historical significance? The first day of the Omer marks Yeshua's resurrection, but was just the beginning of some major, significant events during this day. After his resurrection, he appeared to Mary Magdalene, telling her to tell his disciples what he would be doing on that day. Look at John 20, verse 17. Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and to your Father, and to my God and your God." Yeshua was on his way to appear before the Father. This paralleled what happened each day at 9 a.m. in the temple. The priest began the day's temple activities with an offering of a lamb in what is known as a burnt offering. The word burnt offering is olah, which means to ascend. As the blood of the lamb was poured out at the base of the altar, and the lamb himself was placed on the altar, the smoke of the offering ascended to God, and God called this a sweet aroma. Look at Exodus 29, verse 39 and 41. One lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer at twilight. And you shall offer it with a grain offering and a drink offering, as in the morning, for a sweet aroma, an offering made by fire to the Lord. This day, the very day of Yeshua's resurrection, began like all other days, with the offering of a lamb, but it also continued with special offerings for the Feast of Firstfruits. The high priest was to wave the first sheaf of the barley harvest before the Lord, as well as an additional lamb offering. Look at Leviticus 23, 11 through 12. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord, to be accepted on your behalf. On the day after the Sabbath the priest shall wave it. And you shall offer on that day, when you wave the sheaf, a male lamb of the first year without blemish, as a burnt offering to the Lord. So on this day, just as it was getting light, a procession of priests went out from the temple to the nearby barley field. A sheaf of barley prepared for harvesting the evening before was then cut to the sound of rejoicing and singing. They then proceeded back to the temple with joy and excitement, with crowds of people following with their own firstfruits offering. So as they entered the temple at 9 a.m., the first lamb was slain to begin the offerings to God. Then the priest brought the sheaf before the altar and waved it as a wave offering to the Lord, and the second lamb was slain and placed upon the altar. At the same time, as the smoke of the lamb ascended to God, and his attention came upon the altar with the sheaf waved before him, Yeshua himself ascended as the firstfruits offering to spend the day with the Father, as all the people brought their firstfruits offerings. As the day's activities at the temple ended at 3 p.m., the time of the evening sacrifice, when the priests brought the evening offering of the lamb, Yeshua then appeared before his disciples on the road to Emmaus. Look at Luke 24:13-15. Now behold, 2 of them were traveling the same day to a village called Emmaus, which was 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they talked together of all the things which had happened. So it was, while they conversed and reasoned, that Jesus himself drew near and went with them. When they reached Emmaus, they sat down to eat an evening meal. Yeshua broke bread and gave thanks, and at that moment the 2 disciples recognized him, and then he disappeared. Look at Luke 24:30-31. Now it came to pass, as he sat at the table with them, that he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. The disciples rushed back to Jerusalem to tell the other disciples. As they were relating the events, Yeshua himself appeared before them. Look at John 20, verse 19. Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut where the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in their midst. And he said to them, "Peace be with you." What did Yeshua accomplish with his appearance? What was his purpose? To answer this, we need to look at the mental state of the disciples. The 11 had locked themselves in the upper room in fear of what the Jewish authorities would do to them. They were discouraged and confused. They didn't quite believe the reports that Yeshua had risen. Look at Mark 16:12 and 13. After that, he appeared in another form to 2 of them as they walked and went into the country, and they went and told it to the rest, but they did not believe them either. In fact, the women to whom the angel appeared were to tell the disciples that Yeshua would meet them in Galilee, not in Jerusalem. Look at Matthew 28:7. And go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and indeed he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you. For that matter, what were the 2 disciples doing on the road to Emmaus anyway? The Feast of Unleavened Bread was ongoing. Every Jewish man was to appear before the Lord during this 7-day feast. The very fact of them leaving Jerusalem at this time testifies to their disappointment. Their words on the road show their confusion as they tried to make sense of the events of the previous 3 days. Luke 24:17-18. And he said to them, "What kind of conversation is this that you have with one another as you walk and are sad?" Then one whose name was Cleopas answered and said to him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem, and have you not known the things which happened there these days?" Yeshua appeared before them to reassure them that he had indeed risen from the grave. Mark 16, verse 14, and then we'll skip down to 38-43. Later, he appeared to the 11 as they sat at the table, and he rebuked their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they did not believe those who had seen him after he had risen. And he said to them, "Why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Behold my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bone, as you see I have." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. But while they still did not believe for joy and marveled, he said to them, "Have you any food here?" So they gave him a piece of boiled fish and some honeycomb, and he took it and he ate in their presence. Yeshua also came to explain the meaning of all that had happened. First to the 2 on the road to Emmaus, and then to the rest in the upper room. Luke 24:27, and then 44 and 45. And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. when he had said to them, "These are the words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all things must be fulfilled which were written in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms concerning me." And he opened their understanding, that they might comprehend the Scriptures. So after this encounter where Yeshua had shown them his hands and his feet, the disciples were no longer afraid. Look at John 20, verse 20. When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side, and the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. So finally, he appeared to the disciples to get them thinking again. He began to speak to them about their mission. He breathed on them to remind them that he had what he had promised, that he had promised the Comforter would come. This is not an end, but a beginning. John 20, verse 21 and 23. So Jesus said to them, "Peace to you. As the Father has sent me, I also send you." And then he had said this, he breathed on them, and he said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit." Continue with us as we journey with the disciples and count the Omer up to the Feast of Weeks. I'm Dan Cathcart. This is Shadows of the Messiah. Thanks for watching today. Until next time, shalom and be blessed.